Okay, so far we've done a few things. We've imported Pandas, which is the main library we'll be using going forward for data manipulation and analysis. We've also created a data frame, um, which uh, where the data was provided from a variable that we created ourselves. And then we displayed that data frame, and we also found out how to find the dimensions of a data frame. By dimensions, I mean the rows and the columns. We have this function called len, which stands for length, which allows us to do that. But we also have this very uh, sort of an all-in-one function that tells us how many rows and columns there are for data frame variables, right? So in this next question, we're asked to do something pretty specific, which is only to display the first three rows of the data frame. So here we're given an example of a table or a data frame of 4 columns and 6 rows, right? And we're only asked to display the first three of these rows. So how do we sort of cut out these last bit of rows? Coincidentally, this is half of the data, but you know, most of the time you really just maybe want to see what some of the rows look like to get an idea of what values are possible, right? You want to make sure that names are, for example, if we just know that a column is called name, right? Is this the first name, the last name, or both? And that's why, if we sort of only look at the first few rows, we can get an idea of what the remaining data would look like. So in this case, we only have to print the first 3 rows. So I'm going to create a markdown cell first uh, and give it a title saying print out only the first 3 rows of the, and I'm going to use the player's data frame because we have 6 rows in this or 7. And, this is a perfect data frame to use for this example. And this is also a code cell, code block. Notice that all the variables that I initialized, I'm wrapping around with the special comma, and also all the Python functions, right? Data frame, shape, things like that. I'm wrapping in this special comma. I'm not going to make this the title. I'm going to just bold it. All right, so we have our player's data frame, and we only need to print the first 3 rows. The Python gives us a very easy way to do this. There's another function similar to, we used shape to find the dimension. We can use dot head to only print the top few rows. And inside the brackets here, we pass in how many rows we want to see. So in this case, it's 3. So if I print 3, I only see the first 3 rows. If I print 4, I see the first 4. If I print 1, I see, only the first row. And if I don't do anything, um, it shows me 5, right? So the default is 5. But I'm also able to just pass in any sort of numbers I want to, adjust it according to my needs. And just like anything, there's different ways to achieve the same result, especially when we use Python. So here we use the dot head method lets us print first X rows, right? But we can also use this method called slicing, which is not related to pandas. It's actually built into Python. So we don't need to import pandas for using slicing. But for something like .head, we have to import pandas. If we don't import pandas, we're not able to use it because we won't be able to create the player's data frame. Because if you recall, the data frame is only available through the pandas library. So we can use this other method called slicing, where we just pass in, uh, the start row and then the end row, right? So we want to start at 0 and we want to end at 2. I think the last number is not inclusive, so maybe I have to change this to 3. Let me just check. Yeah. So from 0 to 3, 3 not included. Show me all the rows, right? From 0, 1, and 2. If I change this to 2, I'm only going to see the first 2 rows. Something neat about slicing is I don't have to start at 0. I can do something like from 3 to 4, right? And now I'm going to see the fifth row basically. So number 3 was Isabella. If I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. So I'm going to see the 4th row. Isabella was the 4th entry. And remember we write 3 here because it's a 0-based indexing, which means we start at 0 and then we go up to 1, etc. So this method is called slicing. Slicing and does not require pandas functionality, right? So this is another way you can achieve the same outcome. If I want to print the first 3, I'm going to do this, right? So similar to .head, if we extend, this notion of displaying rows, I can use something called .tail, which prints the last few rows, right? It starts from the bottom and then goes up. So if I do the last 3, I'm supposed to get the last 3. So if I print the full players list, I'm only getting these 3 now. You can match it and see that that's the case. Similar to .head, I can change this number. If I do 2, I only get the last 2, right? So that's also pretty useful for displaying a certain amount of data. For data science, something that's very useful is using the sample method, which displays random rows, right? So in this case, it's only displaying 1. But if I run this again, it's going to display something different. And sampling is very important for data science because it's sort of like a unbiased method for sampling data. So each of these, the probability of choosing a specific row is the same, right? And so we're not being biased towards, say, only the first few rows or the last few rows. Maybe your data set might be time bound, meaning the people who submitted their information first uh, uh, are on the top rows, and then the people who submitted their information last are in the last rows. So sampling really helps, exclude that sort of bias. Again, I can include, a number inside sample. So now I have 2 random rows, and note that, this doesn't have to be sequential. So if I, run it again, I'm getting 1 and then 6. I'm getting Riley here, and then I'm getting Thomas here. If I run it again, I get something completely different, you know. Also, the ordering is not the same, The first one here was 4, and then the second one was 0. So that's also pretty useful, especially when you want to sample rows without introducing additional bias.